Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody doing? Great, great. The presentation is gonna go as I planned, but it's gonna go a little bit differently because there was some technical difficulties, but it won't make a big difference. I'll try my best to explain some of the things that I wanted to show you in practice. But thank you all for coming. You propose an idea and you don't really know if people are gonna show up, but we're gonna talk about fundraising a little bit today. I'll tell you a little about myself, but first I wanted to sort of get a sense of what some people's goals were from attending this session, right? I think that no matter what you call it, whether it's sales, development, fundraising, advancement, there's a skill we're all trying to learn and gain, or a hurdle we're trying to clear. And unfortunately, I'd love to go around the room, but we only have 45 minutes, so that would take up half of our time. But if a few people want to share where they're struggling or why they chose to come, it'll give me a better sense as well in terms of tailoring the session. So,
I'm really good at making relations. I'm not good at closing.
Okay.
So that's the.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a kick-ass network, and I'm really not so confident in capitalizing that financially.
Okay.
So yeah.
Oh, I'm supposed to actually repeat it because they're videotaping. So, sorry. Dan, you said that you want to learn to strengthen making the ask. Is that correct? Okay. And you want to learn how to capitalize your network.
I don't know if that's even correct English, but yeah.
You mean you have a network of people who you'd like to ask money from, and you're not so sure how to start the conversation?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable in the whole financial aspect of all these relations.
Okay. Making that ask is the most difficult part for most people. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
So for me, it's the opposite. It's identifying the network. We have quite good ideas, but we need to broaden our base of donors.
Great. Thank you, Oh, okay, we'll take one. Sorry, you said you have, I'm going to keep forgetting to repeat it for the camera. You have a good idea of making the ask, but it's where do you find the people? Who do you actually ask? Yes.
So mine would just literally be starting from scratch. Where do you begin?
Okay. So I think we're going to be able to get each of you at least on the right track through the presentation. I wanted to sort of give you a proof of concept, tell you a little bit about me and why I felt like I was even qualified to stand up here and tell you what it is that I'm telling you. I've worked for AIPAC, which is a pro-Israel lobby in the United States, for about 6 years, and we're entirely privately funded. So I've held various different positions there where I go and solicit people one-on-one and cultivate relationships. But today I manage a mission-driven sales team of 10 people whose primary responsibility is to make about 80 phone calls a day. They set up face-to-face meetings, and their job is to take people, for the majority of them, to take people who've given the organization $18 or $36 and bring them to $1,800 or $36,000 or $10,000. Now, that's not going to apply to all of you, but what is going to apply and what the team has been able to do is actually prospect from zero. So we've been able to actually set up 567 meetings with people who my team found on their own. Cold email, cold phone call, get in front of them, and the question is, how did we do that? And the results that we have from that over the past 2 years is about $270,000. 8 of those gifts, just to give you a sense of what you can accomplish with what we're going to cover, that should be $10,000 or more, so there's a zero missing, which means we've taken people from $0 to $10,000. And I got to say, most of the people who are doing this have no work experience. So if they can do it, you can do it. It really, a lot of this just takes confidence. And 164 people have donated. That's the number that makes up the 270. And 90 of those people are what we call our club levels, which are the tiers of investment. So, but if I didn't say this also, if there are questions, I don't mind you guys interrupting me. So feel free. So what I'm hoping we're going to cover is sort of in 3 stages. So securing the meeting. How do you find prospects and their contact information, right? Tips for reaching out. Once you have the contact information, what are you going to say over the phone or by email? When you get to that meeting, how are you going to structure the conversation so that you can actually leave with what you want? And if you don't leave with what you want, how are you going to follow up effectively? A lot of that is still actually happening in the meeting. And a lot of this does come down to persistence, which I'll talk about.
Sorry, Jesse,
Yeah.
are the slides going to be available afterwards?
Yes, so I'm happy to send these slides to anybody. And some of the slides have links. So if you click the links later on, you'll be able to get to what I talked about, which I won't be able to show you because I'm not on my computer. But okay, finding prospects and their contact information. So it's actually a lot easier than you think it is. But where I would start, if you're, each of you has your own initiative that you're working on, something that you're passionate about, or it may be even if it's in a for-profit context and you're trying to sell a product, think about, brainstorm like-minded organizations or companies. Where are people that, in terms of APAC, that we're really just looking for people who are Jewish, right? We hope and we assume that people who are Jewish have an affinity towards Israel, and we're comfortable talking to people across the spectrum. So what we might look at is people who are involved in the Jewish Federation, who are involved in other pro-Israel organizations, and the power of the internet is actually an amazing thing. A lot of people don't know, and this is just one tip, which is if you go to do an advanced Google search, so not the general Google search that you would do if you just went to google.com, but just Google, advanced Google search. It'll bring you to another page where you can actually put in some more criteria, and you can, this is what I suggest, is going to the file type, which will be sort of down the bottom, and selecting PDF. Because a lot of organizations, it's hard to find, but they publish their honorary donor records, they publish who they're honoring, synagogues who often will publish a newsletter every month. And you'll find names of individuals there who you might be able to contact, and you'll find the honor roll of what people are giving. It's easiest to do that if you can get straight to the PDF. And so if it was me, what I would probably do is do Jewish plus Los Angeles and then filter for PDFs, and you'll find probably more names than you'll know what to do with. So to try that. Also consider industries or professions that might align with what you're doing. So we're often targeting people who understand a return on investment, because that's the way in which we sell the organization, people who understand long-term value. So my team will often look for people who own their own businesses, who are lawyers, who understand what it means to build relationships. LinkedIn can be a great source to actually find those people. And if you already have an existing donor base, like you have a board of directors or other investors already, I encourage you to scour their networks as well. Because often you'll sit across from people, and this has happened to me, where you're like, it would be great, you're a board member of ours, if you could just introduce me to your friends. And for some reason, they almost never remember who they know, and sometimes they're afraid to even suggest it themselves. If you go forward to that meeting with a list of people I've done my research, I know you go to this synagogue, and I've looked up the synagogue, and I've seen that these are some of the people who are really supportive of that synagogue. Or I've looked at your LinkedIn, and I see you're connected to X, Y, and Z person. Are those people that you think would be interested in getting involved, who you'd be comfortable making an introduction to? There's also, and we'll get to the tools in a second, but tons of tools that based off of LinkedIn will help you find people's contact information. So Email Hunter is one of those tools that basically, as long as you're using a Chrome browser, you download this plugin, you sign up, and it actually puts a button on that person's LinkedIn profile where either they'll tell you the email address or guess the email address. And so it's really simple as downloading one thing and then clicking one button. And you can do that for almost anybody. The last thing I'd say, and this is going to vary obviously community by community, but I encourage people to subscribe to business and news publications. I know that in LA we have a business journal where they publish every single, actually depending on the area, sometimes weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, a list of accomplishments, and that's what a lot of people subscribe to these magazines for. It's to find out who's closed a recent real estate deal, who's celebrating a promotion. And as you'll see, what's really important when you start to reach out to people is that you're personal in your outreach, right? People want to know that you're not just sending 1,000 emails and waiting to see what hits. Often, if that's your strategy, you're not going to get that many responses. One of the things I'm really excited about and wanted to show you was name to email plus reportive. So that's not going to mean anything to you right now, but essentially, you all know that most emails follow a convention, right? So at certain companies, it's going to be first name at the domain. At other companies, it's going to be first initial, last name at the domain, okay? If you if you go to each of these websites and download those tools, use them with Gmail and Chrome, the first one, called Name to Email, will actually give you all the possible permutations, not possible, but the majority of them, whether it's hyphenated, whether there's a dot. And the second tool, Reportive, basically, as you hover over the email addresses, if it populates that person's profile on the side of your Gmail, it will be connected to their LinkedIn, then you know that that's their email address. So my team and I've used this to contact CEOs of companies, to contact people who you wouldn't imagine you could contact. And also it works just like if you don't know their domain, go to this second one here, Elusify. That will give you access to a large database for free of contact information for your companies. And you can find out what their convention is and what their domain might be, because sometimes companies, it's hard to find. Is it google.com? Is it jobs.google.com? Something like that. Last one is the white pages. Again, I think this is different for every single country or city, but in the United States, there's tons of whitepages.com type websites, and those are actually really, really effective for getting people's phone numbers, surprisingly effective. So you don't think about it anymore, but you can find their most recent address, you can find who they're related to, get a sense of sometimes their wealth, and a lot of them are free. They may time out on you after a while if you do a lot of searches on the same day, but I imagine that exists in other places, and it's a great way to get, sometimes they also have email addresses on there. So, yeah.
I think I've had this perception that people don't want to be receiving stuff for their personal stuff on their work, but you find that it's not a problem if you're get their work emails.
Yeah, most of the time we're emailing people at their offices about APAC, and asking them to meet, and we've never really had anybody say, if they care enough, they'll say, can you please use my, this other email from here on out, but we haven't had any issues, really. And my team send, like I said, about 80 emails a day, 800 emails in total, so it hasn't really been an issue. Other questions? Okay, so now that you know who to reach and how to, yes?
First time you're contacting, maybe we'll get to that, phone call or email.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what you have, right, and who they are. I think that lawyers, as an example, prefer a lot more to be contacted by email. That's what sort of I've found. They're often at their desk, but it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't hurt to pick up the phone and try calling anybody, because then you have the benefit of putting in your email, I just tried to call you, I'm sorry we didn't connect, here's why I was calling. And I'm going to get to it in a second, but I think regardless, if you have both phone and email, you want to create a sort of cadence, right? Maybe if you emailed first, then maybe later that week you want to try calling. And then you want to follow up that call with an email. Because a lot of people are simply busy. You don't know where they are when they receive your email or your phone call. And you shouldn't assume that people are going to actually call you back or care enough to do that. I think the impetus is on us who want to reach them to be persistent and to be proactive about following up.
Do you not think it could be quite aggressive for people?
I don't think so.
No, really?
No.
Might be a
I feel
cultural
in the-
difference.
I think,
yeah.
Maybe.
I think in the UK, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
As a journalist, I'm called a lot, and
Yeah.
I do not like it.
Really?
In my personal space, yeah.
And to answer that, I like the discomfort, and I think you'll get to that with the
It's
ask.
definitely a
But the
cultural thing.
discomfort is very
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
because the discomfort, someone has to fill that silence, someone has to fill that discomfortable moment, that uncomfortable moment, and usually it's filled with something that you want. Because it's very, if I asked you a question that's very deeply uncomfortable and I just sit there and don't say shit, that's weird, right? And someone has to fill that, and if you fill it first, you lose that negotiation. And lose in this situation means they're going to give you money, hopefully. So,
And I think, listen, if it's uncomfortable to make, you have to be, obviously I operate in a certain mode with a certain perspective, but I think even to clear that hurdle, what I'd say is send that first email and mention in the email, if I don't hear from you in the next week, I may try to give you a call. And that way, you're not being so aggressive on the front end. And because I've often had people say, I don't take meetings unless people call me. I get so many emails a day, like the business managers for like many of the Hollywood stars, people like who they have other people reading their emails, right? And so you gotta use like your discretion in terms of what's appropriate for where you live and what the customers are.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think if you have the ability to call them, then it's worth trying. So once you have their names, I think it's actually really important to do a little bit of research. Like where possible, the best effective tools for Googling people are actually to use quotes between their names. So if you put quotes between something on a Google search, it'll give you that exact result, as opposed to, if you were searching for Jason Youdeem, it may find Jason and then you and then Deem, which is not what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for the name. So if you put quotes between it and then say like a plus sign, which would mean and then another set of quotes. Well, Israel is just one word, but that'll give you an example. You may be able to find, or plus Jewish, you may be able to find like what they've been involved in or other things that they're committed to. The key here is don't be afraid to show that you've done a little bit of research by making that first line in your email personal and relevant to them. It may be that they recently got a promotion. It may be that that they're an investor in a synagogue. It may be that there was a referral, right, and somebody referred them to you. But whatever you're doing, you want to make sure that it's not like those first few moments really matter, and you don't want them to just delete it as another sales email. This is something I'm really, really sort of militant about with my team, which is to keep the email really short. Most people are reading the email on their phone. And so the point of the email is similar to a resume, right? I mean, a resume is long, but the resume is to get you into the room to have the interview. The way that I see it, especially if you're trying to cultivate a relationship, the point of the email is to hopefully get you on the meeting or to get you on a time to talk to them on the phone to hopefully get a meeting. So be direct if that's appropriate, but whatever you do, be short. And if you do need to be lengthy, make sure to use bullet points, indentations, bold things, not to the point where it's extremely distracting, but just enough to make sure that you have a clear call to action, which is also important. Sometimes I see people writing emails, I'd love to meet with you, let me know what times work for you. I mean, again, people are receiving this email on their phone. So if you say even, let me know what times work for you in May, and if you ever opened up your iPhone and you go to the calendar view and you see the month of May, all it is a bunch of days. People are moving really quickly in their lives. If you give them, I'd love to meet you on May 2nd, 5th, or 7th for lunch or dinner, then they can go and they can check May 5th, 6th, or 7th, right? It's a different concept. And obviously, don't be afraid to send the same dates to multiple people. There's going to be a conflict and that's okay. You can say, well, I'm so sorry. And that scarcity of having to reschedule is actually a good thing in terms of those times no longer being available. Now, if it's somebody who's a really, really big prospect, maybe you want to hold the time for them. But I wouldn't be so afraid that once I've offered a set of dates to one person, I can't offer them again, because you don't really know who's going to respond. This is an interesting concept that I think a lot of people like to write their email and say, hi, my name is Jason, and I'm the such and such position of such and such organization. That's in your signature. If they want to know what your name and what your title is, that information is readily there. So don't waste the precious time that you have in the parameters of what fits on the iPhone screen to repeat information that they're going to look at and find easily if they care enough to do so.
Jason, I have 3 follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Number one is that for subject line, can you give me an example of what you use? Can you give me an example of a softer touch, because my organization is not as aggressive as APAC? And number 3, can you tell me what the first line you use in that email?
Okay, so can you repeat the questions? Well, give me the first one.
Question number 1, what's the subject line that you use the most? And can you give me an option for something a little softer?
So a great subject line is actually their name, first name, all lowercase.
Okay.
Another great example would be, I should have come prepared with some examples. A blank, did I write that there? Actually, yeah, like considering putting no subject line at all is also an interesting suggestion. And what I'd say as well is spam.
Yeah, if I got a blank subject line, I wouldn't open it. It
Really?
wouldn't- yeah.
I sometimes will open it just because I'm curious.
Actually, like, so the suggestion of a blank subject line is not something that, it's based off of actual data and research from organizations that,
There's a lot of research on
that let analyze subject lines. So I can send you an article, and I would recommend for this, there's a HubSpot is a great company that produces a lot of content around this issue. So check it out because people will publish lists of great subject lines. Sometimes we'll use something that's relevant to the text of the email. Like it may be what happened, or did you hear? Or how are you? Or there's anything with a question, unless you're thinking that that's a little bit too aggressive, also gets people to, can you meet? Question mark, not just meeting, but a question tends to elicit a response.
Okay, what's the first line you use?
The first line, so let's say I was getting together with Alex, right? I'll use Alex because I know Alex. I'd write to Alex, if he was an existing investor, I would say, hey Alex, I know that you've been an investor in the organization for many years. I see from our records that you haven't had the chance to meet with somebody. I'd love to tell you what we're working on. Here are some times that work for us. If Alex wasn't an investor in the organization, maybe I would write and say to Alex, you know what? I noticed that you recently you were recently honored by Stand With Us. It's clear to me that you really care about Israel and the future of the relationship between America and Israel. That's something that we work on at APAC, and I'd love the chance to tell you a little bit more. There's often been, and I think it's also really important to sort of save some of that ammo, or for people that you really, really care about, prospects that you really, really want to get in front of, to set up a Google search on their name. So Google has the ability to send you alerts based on key phrases. And so an interesting story, I once came across somebody who was promoted on LinkedIn that one of my staff was trying to get a hold of. We'd sent the person 3 or 4 emails and they'd never responded. But when we sent them an email, and they had never met, right? We don't know them, we just saw the news in the news, said, we just saw that you were promoted, congratulations on your new role, we'd love the chance to meet with you. He responded and we got the meeting. People really just want to know that it's you they want them to meet with, and they want to feel appreciated, and they want to feel like you care, and that they are important. I touched on this briefly, but be conscious about your follow-up strategy. So one of the things I suggest, if you don't, you may have a CRM that you use with a relationship management tool. If you don't, it's as simple as putting something on your calendar, or BCCing yourself and leaving that email unread so that you can reply to it. And if you're not calling, replying to that same email is really important, so that they see that there's an ongoing conversation. But don't do the opposite thing. Don't trick somebody by putting in a reply, RE:, and then sending them a blank email, because the research has actually shown that people know they've been tricked and then they don't like you. Yeah.
So I just want to add that Boomerang is an amazing tool.
Yeah.
Because it removes your entire to-do list. It just cuts it in half. My question is, do you have any tips for when you're dealing with somebody's assistant to get through that door?
Yeah, so just call, basically the best tool that I have is to call early in the morning or late in the afternoon. That is the best,
So your immediate response when it's an assistant is call. This is somebody that sits in an office, it's okay to make the call.
Oh, 100%, yeah. And I guess my assumption was that you're saying that you're emailing that you were calling the assistant and they're not letting you through.
Any contact, right? you have a lot of times you're dealing with somebody who's a CEO of a company, their email is not accessible to you. There's a gatekeeper, right?
Yeah, but I think you could find their email address. Like my first suggestion would be to still email the decision maker, even and go after them. And, like they may ask their assistant to follow up with you and set up the meeting, but I would try and go for the decision maker. If you call and the decision maker, like the gatekeeper, I'm sorry, won't let you through, I would suggest calling at different times. So like earlier in the morning or later in the afternoon, because assistants are like usually CEOs and these people get in pretty early because they want to be there before all the distractions, and that's your best chance of getting at them. And the last is to really just make friends with that person over time, like, and sort of be a little self-deprecating. Like, I know I'm calling again. I'm really interested in meeting with him. Like, what do you think? Like, try and make them your ally. And I've had that well, okay, I'll try and get you, get them to call you back, or this is the time that you should call because they are on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. They're really, really open to taking calls, but not on Mondays. You keep calling me on Mondays, and that's not a good day. But ultimately, it's tough because some of these people are really, really effective, and they won't let you through, which is why I think going straight to the decision maker is perfect. And the last thing I'll say is try and, through your research, understand what other causes they care about and try and meet them in person. Like go to, if you know that they support another organization and that organization is having an event, you may find them there. Yes?
I'll just add that I saw research that the best time to send an email or reach out to someone is 5 minutes before every hour. Because people are like on the way to the meeting and they're checking their phone. So they'll see the email and not really respond and go into the meeting.
Yeah, I've also read that sending emails coincidentally on the weekend, because people are more relaxed and receiving less email, is a good time to send email. I don't make my team work on the weekend, so I can't really speak to that. But you could schedule. Yeah, we don't have Boomerang. Yesware is another tool that's similar to Boomerang. Sorry? Mixmax is also really great. So there's a lot of these tools that provide email tracking. They'll let you know if people opened your email, which is really, really effective, I think, in the follow-up. But I'd like to move on because I think that there's some other content, and I think we're going to run out of time. Okay, so listen. So now you've got the meeting, right? So what do you say when you're there? And when in training our team, we've come up with this solicitation roadmap that I think will be a really effective way for you guys and for most people to think about how to run a meeting. The first and most important is this concept of people give money to people. So your job is, as much as possible, is to be interested, but not interesting, right? The more questions that you can ask, the more ways you can understand why they took that meeting with you, which is, by the way, a really cool question to ask if the conversation sort of stalls. Why did you agree to meet with me? Sometimes you get in front of these people and they're effectively mute, but sometimes asking that it will get them to sort of answer. I'd say to the extent that your solicitation is 80, 90% rapport, that's not really a problem, because ultimately you represent your cause, your organization, and that long-term relationship is going to be what drives that person's investment in you and in your organization. So the more you understand about what motivates them and how they think, why they invest in other organizations, what are you involved in the community? What do you enjoy doing? Questions that you can ask, especially now that we're in the summer and going out of the summer. How's your summer been? What did you get away? Asking questions like that, if you don't know somebody's capacity, will give you a sense of, did they go to the Grand Canyon or did they travel all the way to Israel? Because people who went to drove from LA to the Grand Canyon have a different budget probably than people who got on a plane and went overseas. Especially if they may tell you, I took the entire family, and that's a way to sort of discern what am I asking them for at the end of the meeting. From there, making the case, creating a sense of credibility and urgency, these things don't happen necessarily in a linear sense, right? But let me explain, the best way I could explain what I mean by these three things is to sort of give you guys an example, and I'll do that in a second. But when I say make the case, I mean, don't just go forward with a bunch of statistics. Show them, like in your rapport, you should have an idea maybe of what motivates them or what sector of the work that you do might speak to them most. If there's a project, if there's a need that needs to be filled that you think that would really align with them. And to the extent that you can turn that impact into a story with a character and weave those statistics and those facts and figures into that, you're going to see yourself having a lot more of success because people's eyes quickly glaze over. Create a sense of credibility. I don't think you need to be an expert. Many of us might be, especially compared to the person that you're sitting across. In the work that we do and the people that I manage, like some of them are very new to the pro-Israel community. They don't know the history of the entire conflict. And they're meeting with people who were alive before the state of Israel even existed. But we still know, and you need to take some comfort in knowing that you know more about your cause and your organization than that person knows. So you don't need to know everything about your issue, but you do need to know about the inputs and outputs, the internal, external factors affecting your work. And then often the toughest thing, I think, is to create that sense of urgency because it's not enough just to show that we have a solution and that you've been successful, right? The question is, now that you have a solution and that you are successful, why do you need their support, right? And so the best way that I think of, and we'll come back to making the ask, I've come up with a storytelling framework that's been really successful in teaching the people who work on my team, which is break up your story into 3 component parts. And it, to the extent possible, should be this linear, actually. Why do you do what you do? So what's driving that decision for that project or that initiative? Where did it come from? How do you actually accomplish it? So what are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the deliverables? And then why do you need them? That got cut off. Why do we need them to make an investment? What are the external challenges and that brought you to sit in front of them? So the best way I can explain this is I'll just tell you a story that we often tell at APAC about our work. And I'll try and pause so that you can see the why, the how, and the why we need more money. So at APAC, the business that we're in is building relationships with members of Congress. And one of the things that we often look at is the changing demographics in the country. Okay, and so there's not a growing number of Jewish congressmen. There's a growing number of African Americans, of Hispanics, of different Asian Americans who are getting into Congress. And so one of the things that we realize is there's actually more Hispanics in Texas than there are Jews in America, and there are more Hispanics in California than there are Jews in the entire world. So I'm going to pause for a second. Those 2 statements are statements of credibility. Okay, so if I go back to this slide here of be credible, I now appear to the person who I'm soliciting to really have a piece of information that they didn't have. So what APAC decided to do about 5 years ago is come up with an outreach program where we hired a gentleman into our office. His name is Pedro Caballero. And Pedro's entire job is to look district by district across the country to understand where our community is vulnerable. And so when he started many years ago, and I'm going to shorten the story, but he saw this district in Arizona, and he saw a sitting member of Congress, and he thought that seat one day, because that member of Congress had been in that seat for decades, would be vulnerable. And so he began inviting people to Israel with APAC. So we take rising stars to Israel. It turned out about a few years later that member of Congress retired. 7 people threw their hat in the ring for that election, and 6 out of the 7 had been to Israel with APAC. The 7th had been invited, but could never make the dates to the trip. So going back to my example, why we do it is the changing demographics. How we do it is our outreach department, right? And that's the success. And if I stop there, the person would probably think, that's great. That's a really cool story. You identified the next member of Congress, and that's where the story ends, before that person really even knew they would run. But why we need them and where I would continue is the issue is that AIPAC was built for a time when members of Congress stayed in office for 30 years. Since 2008, there's been 70% turnover in Congress. So we're dealing in an entirely different landscape now, where you elect a member of Congress and they could be in office for 2 years or 20. And we're not thinking just about next year, but we're thinking about 2080, when we believe, 2020, when we believe 80 new congressional districts will be created after the census. And it's, for us, a question of those won't be majority Jewish districts. They're going to be majority minority. And so do we know now, or are we building relationships today with those future members of Congress? And that's why we need, and then I would transition. I may not ask the person right then and there for a gift of $1,800, but you can bet when I come back to making that ask, I'm going to remind them of the story I told them. I'm going to tell them that, given the demographic realities, AIPAC only has 2 people working on Hispanic outreach. So if we want Pedro to continue finding and doing his work, and we want more people to join us, then we need them. And we need them to make an investment of $1,800. And then you're going to ask. And the most important thing, and also the most uncomfortable, is to shut up. Just don't say anything. And it's going to be a staring contest. And it's the worst feeling in the world, but this is the game of chicken, because the first person who talks loses. And you don't want to lose. Questions?
The thing that I always struggle with the most is the difference between Pedro doing his job and $1,800, right? I mean, it's for the donor to really buy into the idea that their $1,800 is going to prevent Pedro from doing their, and for a lot of us, I think, with smaller nonprofits, we tackle these huge 50-year problems, and then we meet with somebody who asks for $5,000, they don't feel like they're the increment that's missing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a perception that AIPAC is way too big, right? And we come across this a lot because we also don't allow directed gifts. So you give money to us and it goes, you don't get to say, I want it to go to Hispanic outreach. I think often what I've found to be successful is to sort of ask them, especially if they're in business, is to say, if you had a part of your business that you knew was performing, that was going to deliver results in the long term, is that where you would invest your resources? And usually they're going to say yes. And say, well, that's the same thing of what we're trying to do. We have a system now that we need to invest in, and we need to accelerate that growth, right? And we can't do it without your help. And so it's not enough I understand that it's hard for you to see the impact, and depending on your capacity to do this, like I can't offer to, okay, thank you. I can't offer to people the chance to meet. Like, I can't have everyone meet a member of Congress, but having them see, maybe sending them a video so they can see the impact, allowing them in a smaller sense to see the project would be a great next step if they really are questioning their ability to have that impact. Does that help?
I want to take a step back to the prospecting phase.
Yeah.
I use Wealth Engine as well as Donor Search.
Yeah.
Multiple reasons why. I would love to know a little bit about when you're looking through both of those things, what you prioritize, or if there's certain things that you look for when you're doing prospecting for the ask.
So when doing prospecting for the ask, at least in the States, one of the things that I really like to look at, if charitable giving is there, that's a great indicator, and a lot of those tools have that. Political giving, because especially for the work that we're doing, people understand, and the work that most of you are doing, people who give to candidates and to politicians understand that they're not going to get anything tangible back for it, and they're also not going to get a benefit for doing so. They don't get a write-off, so that it's obvious that they have a disposable income. I think real estate and securities, those are if those things are appearing. If you see people on like a Bloomberg website, and sometimes those things are being disclosed, that's a great indicator. And I like to, just in general, the favorite types of people I like to meet with, or I'm most excited to meet with, are those who are in a niche industry. Like if my fellows come to me and say they have a meeting with a water bottle or a beverage manufacturer somewhere in LA, like those people who are driving their own trains and leading their own things tend to have a lot more disposable income and flexibility than somebody who is, an EVP of a company and also sending their kid to Jewish day school and supporting the synagogue. So I look for people who have a little bit more independence, and that sign of independence usually equates to capacity. One last thing about being in the meeting. So one of the things that we really struggle with is following up. And I think it's really very important if the person doesn't close, and even if they do, but more importantly, they may say, I need to talk to my wife. I need to think about it. I want to encourage you all to be specific about, great, when should I follow up? How should I follow up? But take it one step further, because let's say they tell you, follow up a week from now by phone. I want to encourage you to ask, well, what should I do if I can't reach you on Tuesday by phone? Because the number of people who, I think two things are going to happen. Number one, they're going to realize that you plan on being persistent. So that if they are telling you to follow up because they're too afraid to say no, then perhaps they'll say, you know what, actually, I don't think that I can really do this quarter. Try me again next quarter or next year. You're going to end up wasting a lot less of your time. But it'll give you a sense of what your next step is, because you may call them next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. You may email them. And you're sort of left in this really uncomfortable space of how aggressive can I be and what do they want me to do? And I'll leave you with this. And this is, you'll find where I got this. I linked the statistic here, but 80% of sales require 5 or more follow-ups, but 44% of salespeople give up after 1. So don't be deterred just because the person didn't answer your phone call or your email, whether you've had the meeting or not. I think that the responsibility lies on all of us to be creative about how we reach out and how we deliver our value if we want to create these partnerships. Great. So I'm happy to send this to anybody if you want it.
One
Yeah,
last
sure.
institutional question. So something that I really admire about APAC's fundraising strategy is just how much passion everyone has at the agency, and how do you stay fueled with that passion? Because literally everyone I know that works there has it. What is there? Obviously, there's no tips. I'd love to know.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of opportunities within the organization, I think, to constantly be reminded of what we're doing. And there's a good communication in that aspect. So sort of starts from the top is the best answer that I have. But I'm happy to talk
Yes,
more
I mean,
offline.
yes, it's really, really relevant, but
Yeah.
politically, but there's something very unique about every person in development there.
It's like a Chabad rabbi is also very similar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
I'm a complete novice in this area. I'm just curious to know, is there, just say there's a bigger donor and I guess a more, mum and dad type donor, do you calibrate who the person that goes to make the meeting is? As in, is there equal faith? If you're saying there's, a really big fish, will they turn around and say, look, you're just a schlepper that's the APAC sent me, the errand boy, I don't want to talk to him, and you kind of reserve more significant people in the organisation? Or are most people kind of like, I'll meet with you?
Yeah, no, we try and match people with the right types of people, but sometimes we'll walk into a meeting where you don't know because sometimes you can't find much information on those people. I think it's still important to have the confidence and for that person to have the credibility and to say, you know what, I'd love to start this relationship and then bring somebody else into the conversation. I also like a word of caution for some of these donors who are really about the ego and who really need that. They're usually not in it for the right reason. And it may not be in the end worth, the juice may not be worth the squeeze because you're gonna end up having to cater much more to their ego than them actually being invested in the cause. So I think look out for those warning signs.
What kind of follow-up cadence do you recommend? If you send one email, how soon are you following up, and what's that kind of like?
So absent any direction from the individual, I would send a follow-up email right after the day of the meeting, okay? A week after, then I would go sort of 2 weeks out, 2 weeks out, then a month out, then 2 weeks out, then 2 weeks out. Yeah, double from there.
What about the first reach out, a cold email that you send?
Oh, a cold email, I would follow up within a week, ideally like 6 days afterwards. And that strategy in terms of getting the meeting and following up within 6 days or like a little bit less than a week after has been very, very successful for my team.
I was more just a comment. So I run like masterclass in London about pitching to press and how to get. We run it for PR agencies and like that, and it was like remarkably similar. And I just kind of wanted to say that like if you get to a stage that you get the fundraising and you want to get some publicity, like all the things you're talking about emailing and follow-ups, all that kind of stuff, like it's so the same for when you're pitching to journalists or something like that.
Cool.
Sales.
Really like it was actually quite frightening.
Cool.
In parts, but yeah, it was amazing.
So you could have given the presentation.
No, but very good.
Obviously, we're here for another day and a half. I love talking about this, so if anyone has any more questions, I would love to get together. Thanks, guys.